Hi, welcome to the Ithihasa channel. The last time we spoke about how Pandu and Kunti invited Dharma and Vayu to come and sire children for them. These are gods or devas who come from Devaloka, and in this case, invited by them. So, who are these gods? Who are these devas? And what is Devaloka? Today, we will discuss a little about that. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana Namo, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Om Guruve Namaha. So today we shall talk about the Devas, Devaloka, and the travel between Bhuloka and Devaloka. We begin with the Yugas. Now, there are mainly four Yugas: the Satya Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, and the Kali Yuga. These four form the Chatur Yuga or the half Yuga cycle. And the Yuga cycle gets fully complete when it goes back in the reverse order as the Kali Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, the Treta Yuga, and the Satya Yuga. The Satya Yuga is also called the Krita Yuga sometimes. There are many interpretations on the timelines of these yugas. There are some interpretations that say that a Chatur Yuga half cycle is 12,000 years, whereas there are some that say that the Chatur Yuga half cycle is 4.3 million years. There's a reason for this difference in timeline assessment. Now, Sanskrit is a very contextual language. A single word in Sanskrit can mean one meaning in one context and have a completely different meaning in a different context. I'll give you an example in English, though there are very few in English. Take the word era, for example. When you talk about songs of the 60s and 70s, you say they are songs of a bygone era. Or when you talk about a great man who died after a long life, you say that's the end of an era. So technically, by this definition, an era should be around 60 to 70 years. But in actual geological terms, the definition of an era is hundreds of millions of years, like the Mesozoic era or the Paleozoic era. So let us talk about the timeline of the Yugas in the context of Devas and their travel from Devaloka to Bhuloka by taking texts from the Mahabharata which deal with this specific context of the Yugas between travel between Devaloka and Bhuloka of the Devas and the gods. So there's a conversation that happens between Ganga and Shantanu in the Dwapara Yuga. I will tell you who these two people are a little later. But Ganga tells Shantanu about an earlier Yuga, probably the Treta or the Satya Yuga, where there was a great king called Mahabhisha or Mahabhisheka, depends on which text you take. And this great king was an ancestor of Shantanu of the Ikshvaku dynasty, the dynasty of Purushottama Rama. And this great king used to regularly go to Indraloka, meet Indra in his court Sudharma in Amravati, the capital city of Indra, and come back to Bhuloka on a regular basis. Now, if we take this conversation, it's very difficult for us to put an age to Indra and Ganga. But if we take Mahabhisha, Mahabhisha was from the earlier Yuga, which could mean the Satya Yuga or the Treta Yuga. Now, Mahabhisha was a king, which meant that at that time, civilization existed, the Varna system existed, which consisted of Kshatriyas being kings. So at that time, Mahabhisha couldn't have existed more than 10,000 years in the past. So by this timeline, we can safely say that a Chatur Yuga half cycle should be around 12,000 years and a full cycle of Yugas should be around 24,000 years in this particular context. So what does a Yuga denote? Now, our sun is a star in our solar system, and this sun has a relation, a twin star relation with a nearby sun, and these two have a revolving status around each other. These two revolve around each other in elliptical orbits. So there will be a time in the revolution when at one end of the elliptical orbit, the two stars are near each other, and then they move far apart to the other end of the elliptical orbit where they are the farthest to each other. So in this context, the yugas denote the proximity of the two suns to each other, where they would be at the closest to each other in the Satya Yuga. Then they would start moving farther apart in the Treta Yuga, more in the Dwapar Yuga, and they'll be at the farthest in the Kali Yuga. And then they would come closer together in the Kali Yuga, Dwapar Yuga, Treta Yuga, and the Satya Yuga. So by this context and in this timeline of 12,000 years for a Chaturyuga half cycle, we would have crossed the two Kali Yugas somewhere in the 1600s. And now, at this point in time, we are halfway through Dwapar Yuga on our way to Treta Yuga. I say this context because there is another context where yugas are mentioned. And the timeline of those contexts where the yugas are mentioned in the context of Mahayugas, Manvantras, Kalpa. Kalpa, the day of Brahma. 100 years of Brahma. Pralaya, the expansion and the contraction of the universe, where the Mahabharata and various other texts starting from the Rig Veda describe the origins of the universe and how the universe began. And in that context, there's also the mention of yugas. And the yugas in that context are of a completely different timeline, which means that a Chaturyuga half cycle would be 4.3 million years. A Kalpa, a day of Brahma, would be billions of years. And a life of Brahma, that's 100 years, would be trillions of years. And that definition of yuga also exists. And that definition is also not wrong. So, going by the Sanskrit language, which can give multiple meanings to the same word, a yuga in the context of travel of devas from Devaloka to Bhuloka would be around 12,000 years for a Chaturyuga half cycle. Whereas when you talk about the origins of the universe and its contraction and its expansion and eventual contraction and pralaya, which is the dissolution, that would be in millions and billions of years. So in that sun that is next to us, which has a twin star status with our sun, there exists a planet which we in Bhuloka call Devaloka, which has an advanced life form. It had an advanced life form 7,000 years ago. And this is the planet of the gods, this is the planet of the devas. And sometime in Satya Yuga, when our two suns were close together, when our Bhuloka was quite close to their Devaloka, they realized that there was life in our Bhuloka. And they decided that they should come to see what this life was. And when they came, they decided to come to the paradise of Bhuloka, which was Bharatavarsha. So why did they come to Bharatavarsha? Now there are many reasons why the Devas came to Bharatavarsha back in the day, in Satya Yuga. But one reason kind of stands out, and for this we need to go into geography a little bit. So coming to geography, we know that when the sun shines on the earth and the water bodies evaporate, they go up, form clouds, move a little, precipitate, form rain, and come back down. And the overall water balance in a particular region remains the same. Also, if you take the large equatorial water mass, almost 80% of the equator is covered in water. When the sun shines brightly on the equatorial water mass, the water evaporates, forms large clouds, starts moving northwards into the seas, and precipitates and dumps the water as rain back into the seas and the oceans. So, most of the water of the sea comes back into the sea. Very little of it goes into land. If you take the northern hemisphere, and if you look at the distribution of deserts over the northern hemisphere, You will note that most of the deserts in the northern hemisphere are situated between 25 degrees latitude north to 35 degrees latitude north. So, what's so special about this 25 to 35 degrees latitude north? That most of the deserts of the northern hemisphere are distributed along this region. So, in the region of 25 degrees north latitude to 35 degrees north latitude, high up in the troposphere, 10 to 12 kilometers high up in the sky, there's a huge mass of air, 100 kilometers across, which travels at phenomenal speeds of 200 to 400 kilometers per hour on a west to east direction across and round the globe in the region of the 25 to 35 degrees latitude north. This is known as a subtropical jet stream, a huge mass of air at rapid speeds traveling round the globe at 25 to 35 degrees north. And this subtropical jet stream does a number on the world. So when you have the water bodies that evaporate between 25 and 35 degrees latitude north, they go up, and instead of forming clouds and forming rain and falling down, they get sucked into the subtropical jet stream. So all the water vapor goes up, gets sucked out into the jet stream, very little rain falls down, forming arid areas in that region and forming large deserts, Arabian desert, and even the deserts in North America. And these are all barren, arid lands in 25 to 35 degrees north latitude, formed by the subtropical jet stream, which travels round the globe from west to east. And when this subtropical jet stream reaches Bharatavarsha, what does it encounter at 25 to 35 degrees north? The mighty, unshakable, immovable Himalayas, extending thousands of feet up into the air. And when it hits the Himalayas, it can't progress further. So what happens? It splits into two. The larger part of the subtropical jet stream goes north of the Himalayas, causing the desert north of the Himalayas, the Tibetan desert and the Taklamakan desert. And a smaller strip of air comes south of the Himalayas into Bharatavarsha, traveling between the Aravalis and the Himalayas and losing altitude because of the Aravalis and the Himalayas. It loses altitude and comes closer to the surface and spreads over the entire plains of Bharatavarsha, the central plains of Bharatavarsha. In the summer, this strip of air becomes extremely hot and blows hot winds into the central plains of Bharatavarsha, heating the surface of the soil. This forms a low pressure area in the central plains of Bharatavarsha. And if you've been in central Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh, you will know those hot winds that come into the land in the summer. Around this time, in the equatorial area, the harsh sun evaporates the large equatorial water mass, forming large clouds, which then get pushed northwards over the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And these large clouds would normally dump their water into the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea. But the low pressure area over the central plains of Bharatavarsha invite these large clouds into the plains of Bharatavarsha. And these clouds come into land and pour their rain into land as the yearly monsoon that follows the summers. And this monsoon lasts for 4 months, bringing life and rejuvenation into the land. Hence, the Himalayas and the Aravalis are the cause for this monsoon to come from south, from the Bay of Bengal and from the Arabian Sea into land. And thus the Himalayas are the reason that India gets these life-giving monsoons for 4 months a year. And in the peak of winter, the large polar ice caps. Now you have to imagine that 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, it was the ice ages. And the large polar ice caps extended far down south than where they extend today. These large polar ice caps send icy, chilly winds down south, freezing most of North America and Europe. But when these icy chilly winds reach 25 to 35 degrees latitude north, what do they encounter? The unshakable, immovable, indomitable Himalayas. And these Himalayas take in all these icy cold winds, form glaciers on them, form snowy caps on them, and then slowly release them through the southern side as perennial rivers that make the land fertile, that make the land rich, and bring life into Bharatavarsha. And so in winter, these Himalayas prevent these icy cold winds from coming into Bharatavarsha. And when Krishna in the Gita spoke about the mountains, he says, Meru Shikarinamaham. Among the mountains, I am Meru, signifying the importance of Meru as a great mountain, because it was used for the churning of the ocean. So what about the Himalayas? 4 verses down, Krishna says, Sthavara Nam Himalaya. The unshakable, mighty, indomitable, immovable Himalayas are not a mountain. Like the Lord Narayana himself, they are a force of nature. They are the life-giving anchor of Bharatavarsha. They are the spiritual anchor of Bharatavarsha. They are what make Bharatavarsha a paradise. And it is into this paradise on Bhuloka that the advanced party of the Devas came. So who was this advanced party of the Devas who came to Bhuloka and decided that Bharatavarsha is the paradise where they need to settle down? The first visitors from outside to Bharatavarsha and to Bhuloka were the Nagas. They were our first teachers, they were our first guides. They were experts in construction and security. In construction, they could carve granite and stone like it was butter. And as far as security was concerned, absolutely loyal to the core to the Devas and the gods who they protect. Predictive and preemptive in their threat perception. These Nagas were terribly vicious in their retribution. My God, you better not cross one of them. They were the ones who laid the groundwork for the Devas and the gods to follow. Even today in temples across Bharatavarsha, there will always be a Naga standing guard for their god, their deity, somewhere discreetly in the distance, and you'll always find them. And then came the Devas, the Rishis, the Apsaras, the Gandharvas, the Kinnaras, beings of impossible physical attributes, remarkable beings of lifespans that existed for 5 to 10 to 15,000 years. Beings were of unimaginable beauty and grace. They brought in ideals of civilized existence by instilling dharma in our population. They brought in the concept of karma, and they streamlined duties and tasks for the population based on ability and talent. This was the Varna system. So they brought in ideals of dharma, concepts of karma, and the philosophy of Varna. These people were phenomenal people who ensured that all the riches of Bharatavarsha stayed in Bharatavarsha. They brought in ideas of science, scientific advances in weaponry by bringing in the astras, advances in travel by bringing in vimanas and by bringing in beautiful chariots, and in construction by constructing excellent temples out of stone. While all of the world was in the dark ages, Bharatavarsha prospered. Were all these devas from Devaloka? Not necessarily. Some, like the Lord Narayana, came in from much far away, from across the galaxy or the Milky Way or the Kshetrasagara, while some, like Shiva and his ilk, nobody really knows where they came from. And they all came to Bharatavarsha to ensure that we all progress as a nation. Over time, when the Dwapar Yuga came to a close, these devas realized that it was time to leave for the window to leave was fast closing as distances would become too great to travel. And most of these devas and gods went back to their home in Devaloka. They went back to their families and went back to their loved ones. But many stayed back. Many stayed back because they knew tough times were coming in future for us. There were tough times in store for us, and we would need all the help we could get. And they stayed back, leaving their loved ones behind in Devaloka because they loved us unconditionally. And this is the brief story of how Devas traveled to Bhuloka and went back. Let us now talk about the king of the Devas, Indra. Indra was the king of the Devas. He had his capital in the city Amravati in Devaloka. He held court in a beautiful court called Sudharma. In the Satya Yuga, he invited a lot of great kings to come to that court. He was a great and powerful being whose lifespan existed for more than 15,000 years based on his stories. His stories began in the Rig Veda, in the Satya Yuga, and extended all the way to Dwapara Yuga. So easily around 15,000 years based on the time scale we spoke about. This Indra would often come down to Bhuloka to ensure that his devas would treat our people of Bharatavarsha with justice and kindness. He brought his rishis in to Bhuloka, who were the scientists of the time, who would educate the people of Bharatavarsha, empower the people of Bharatavarsha. He distributed untold wealth and riches to the kings of Bharatavarsha to be used for advancement works in Bharatavarsha, for progressive works in Bharatavarsha. With his Aindastra, with his Shakti, and with his Vajra, weapons of remarkable and exceeding power. His Airavat, his mount, which was either a mammoth or a large spaceship. He was an invincible warrior, a warrior to reckon with, an invincible man and a just and kind human being. Not a human being, but a being nevertheless. Indra would lead his forces of the Devas against the Danavas in victory. The Danavas were marauding invaders who invaded Bharatavarsha, looting, pillaging, killing, and torturing the population. And Indra attained complete, absolute victory over them and ensured that they would never return. Under his guard, there was an aura of security in the entire Bharatavarsha, and Bharatavarsha prospered and progressed like never before. Over the centuries and over the years, many kings and kingdoms refused to accept the sovereignty of Indra. Rightfully so. Why not? They were justified in doing it. Indra fought many battles with these kings and kingdoms. He won most of them, but he lost some of them. Unfortunately, most of these kings and kingdoms who challenged Indra's sovereignty, even though they may have been righteous, even though they may have been brave, were then all bundled under the umbrella term of Asura. Asura meaning not Asura. Sura means the Devas. So a lot of these brave and righteous kings were called Asuras. May not be fair, but unfortunately so. Let me tell you a story of one of Indra's losses. It is not to take away from the greatness of the man. It is just to project some of his frailties. So we deviate a little from the Mahabharata to go to the Shiva Thandava Stotram. An exquisite and elegant poem. Beautiful poem written in the meter of the Panchachamara. A very difficult meter to follow, but followed with absolute precision. And beautiful words in praise of Lord Shiva and his exuberant dance, the Thandava. It was written by a Brahmin gentleman from Uttar Pradesh. An ardent Shiva Bhakt. It was said his devotion to Shiva was so intense that Shiva's heart melted for him. Of course, much later, success got into the head of this gentleman. He kidnapped a woman, was given the death sentence for it. And as all great men, when success gets to their head, their doom eventually follows. We are talking of King Ravana of Lanka, the person who wrote the Shiva Thandava Stotram. A wonderful piece of poem. He wrote 14 verses of it, the last one being the Phalaprapti, the benefits of the Stotram, but he wrote 13 to 14 verses of it. And Shiva was taken aback by it. I will quote the 5th verse. He says, Sahasralochana Prabhuti Ashesha Lekha Shekhara Prasuna Dhuli Dhorani Vidhusarangri Pitabuhu Bhujanga Raja Malayam Nibaddha Jata Jutaka Shriyachiraya Jayatam Chakora Bandhu Shekhara. So he uses the term Sahasralochana to describe Indra. Sahasralochana Pravati Ashesha Lekha Shekhara. People like Indra form a large line of bowed heads to Shiva in respect for Shiva. So why does he call Indra Sahasralochana or a thousand-eyed Indra? Does Indra have 1,000 eyes? Did he? Did he not? Let's go into that story. So let's go back to the Satya Yuga, where there was an extremely beautiful woman called Ahilya. She was so intensely beautiful that people used to say that she's an Amsha of Shakti herself, the force of creation. And when she was of marriageable age, men of all the lokas were vying for her hand in marriage and desperately wanted to marry her, Indra included. But Brahma, in his wonderful wisdom, decided that Ahilya should marry sage Gautama, one of the Saptarishis, extremely brilliant sage, who had absolute knowledge of all the Shastras, the Vedas, and who was trained by Adi Yogi Shiva himself. And Brahma decided that Ahilya should marry sage Gautama, Rishi Gautama. Indra was obviously very sore about it. He would often visit the ashrama of sage Gautama and meet Rishi Gautama, obviously to check on Ahilya. And Ahilya on her side enjoyed the attention given by the king of the gods. Sensing this reciprocity in feelings, one day Indra decided to come to the ashrama of sage Gautama at daybreak. And he saw sage Gautama go to the river to perform his morning ablutions and his sadhana and his prayers at the river. Then, disguising himself as sage Gautama, he approaches the ashrama and approaches Ahilya. Ahilya is surprised. She sees sage Gautama coming. Hardly had he gone, and she was about to ask him what happened, when suddenly the divine fragrance of Indra hits Ahilya. And Ahilya gasps, and she knows who is this. But she keeps that knowledge hidden deep down inside and invites Indra, dressed as Gautama, into the ashrama. And time stands still. Unfortunately, time stands still only for those two. Gautama finishes his prayers and starts walking towards the ashrama and notices something amiss. Something was wrong. Probably the Airavata parked far in the distance gave it away. And when Indra hears Gautama enter the ashrama, he runs away from the window at the back. A very embarrassing exit for the king of the Devas. But Gautama knows something was up and questions Ahilya and asks who it was. And Ahilya says, Ma Jara. Ma Jara is a pun. It's a beautiful play on words in Sanskrit. Ma Jara means my lover, and Ma Jara also means cat. But Gautama obviously realizes it's Indra and curses Indra that he will have 1,000 vulvas on his body for his love for the same. And then he curses Ahilya and says that you will turn to stone for being unfaithful. Of course, over time, when Indra develops these 1,000 vulvas on his body, he comes with his devas to Gautama's ashram and begs and pleads for forgiveness. And Gautama softens and says, okay, we shall modify this curse a little. These 1,000 vulvas should turn into something that look like eyes. And it shall be 1,000 eyes on your body. Hence the term Sahasra Lochana, 1,000 eyes for Indra. Very embarrassing way to have got that name. He also dilutes the curse for Ahilya and tells that when someone as great as Purushottama Rama will come down and bless Ahilya, Ahilya will come back to her normal self. If you look at it, these 1,000 eyes on Indra, the 1,000 vulvas on Indra, could very well be the first case of smallpox. For when you have the blisters of smallpox on the body, there are thousands of them. And when these blisters burst, they do look like a little like vulvas. And later when these blisters heal, they form a scar which looks like eyes. So this affliction of Indra could very well be the first case of smallpox ever documented. And Gautama's curse could be the first case of biowarfare. Anyway, so when Ravana, the great king of Lanka, who eventually kidnapped Sita and then was killed by Rama for that sin, Rama again another gentleman from UP, Uttar Pradesh, when success got to his head. But much before that, when he was much nobler in earlier times in the Satya Yuga, Ravana, when he wrote the Shiva Tandava Stotram in praise of Shiva, uses this insulting term of Sahasra Lochana to describe Indra. His mild hatred or disgust for Indra, Ravana uses the word Sahasra Lochana for Indra because of the disgust and disdain he had for Indra. Because at one time, Ravana was one of those brave kings who challenged the sovereignty of Indra. He sends his son Meghnath to Devaloka to attack Indra. Meghnath attacks Indra, takes over Indraloka, captures Indra and brings him back with the Airavata and the Vimana, Pushpaka Vimana, back to Lanka. And then, of course, Indra and Ravana reach a deal and a treaty where Ravana gets to keep the Pushpaka Vimana, the plane of Indra. And Indra gets to take back Airavata to Indraloka. But Ravana says when he wants to use it, he can summon it at will, and Indra says okay for it. Which is why when Ravana is fighting with Purushottama Rama, he fights Rama from the Airavata, from on top of the Airavata, because he instructs Indra to give the Airavata to him for that fight. And so, when Ravana passes away after the fight with Rama, Indra realizes that he has been depicted in a lot of shame in the Shiva Tandava Stotram. Everybody knows it. Nobody can forget the Shiva Tandava Stotram. So what Indra then does is, he makes his poets add another 4 verses to the Shiva Tandava Stotram at the end, in praise of Indra. Of course, he praises Shiva also, but in addition to praising Shiva, he praises himself, the trees of Amravati, the gardens of Amravati, and the Indraloka and the beauty of Indraloka, and praises Indra himself. And so this is Indra's last parting shot to Ravana, because Indra existed beyond Ravana's time. So this is the story of Indra, who will now come to in the next phase, when Kunti calls Indra for her next child. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Amme Narayana Namo, Om Ganeshaya Namo, Om Namo Anjanaya Namaho, Om Guruve Namaha.